Emilia Perez.
Emilia Perez.
Emilia Perez. Emilia Perez.
Emilia Perez. Emilia.
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 Emilia Perez. Emilia.
Emilia.
Oh my god.
Emilia Perez leads the 2025 Academy Awards with 13 nominations. For context, Oppenheimer, Forrest Gump, and Gone with the Wind also received 13 nominations. Except the thing about Emilia Perez is nobody really likes it. So if the Academy Awards are supposed to celebrate the best films of the year, why do they so often award bad ones?
And the Oscar goes to...
At the first Academy Awards in 1929, the Academy gave Charlie Chaplin an honorary Oscar. Giving him an honorary Oscar allowed them to sideline him from all competitive categories. By the late 1920s, Chaplin was at the height of his powers, and the Academy feared that if he were able to compete in the show, he would dominate in every category he qualified for. This would then turn the first ever Academy Awards into the Charlie Chaplin Show. Just 3 years later, Chaplin's masterpiece City Lights was completely shut out from the competition. That year, Cimarron would go on to win the Best Picture prize, and it is now considered one of the worst winners of all time. City Lights' omission is considered the first major snub in Oscars history. So what makes a bad Best Picture winner? Because of course, every movie has fans, no matter if it's good or bad. A bad Best Picture winner often comes down to context. Some wins will go on to feel like triumphs of aggressive campaigning. Some just feel safe and dated and often fail to stand the test of time. Of course, to nobody's surprise, the Oscars have been getting this wrong for years. In 1942, John Ford's How Green Was My Valley won Best Picture. The film, directed by the legendary filmmaker, tells the story of a Welsh mining family grappling with change in the wake of a labor strike. The movie's actually very good. I've been going on a John Ford journey recently, and this has easily been one of my favorites. I think without context, this is a pretty solid Best Picture winner, but at the time of its win, and even today, it's an extremely controversial one. So what's the problem? Well, it beat Citizen Kane. In hindsight, Citizen Kane nearly walking away from the Academy Awards winless is absurd. But given the controversy surrounding the film at the time, its loss isn't as shocking as it may seem. Wells's film is a fictional biography that follows the life of Charles Foster Kane, a character based on many moguls of the era, but most closely resembling William Randolph Hearst, a media mogul who owned many of the major newspaper publications of the time. Hearst was one of the most influential and powerful men of the time, and when he caught wind of a 20-something-year-old making a film that was a stand-in for him, or at least was portraying something that he represented, he was not happy. Hearst waged war on Citizen Kane, using his newspapers to spread false stories and pressuring theater chains to not screen it. For those who saw Kane, its brilliance was immediately apparent, but Hearst's smear campaign ensured that many didn't get to see it. The film struggled at the box office and entered the Oscars already handicapped. It ended up being nominated for 9 Academy Awards, but only walked away with Best Screenplay. This smear campaign was a major reason as to why Kane would go on to lose at the Oscars, but it's not the only one. In 1942, the US had just entered World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The Academy Awards were almost canceled. In this context, a film directed by an active member of the military and a war documentarian, like How Green Was My Valley, was the safer, more politically acceptable choice. Another reason Kane might have lost was because Hollywood wasn't ready to accept an auteur. In the early 40s, the studios were still utilizing its studio system. Wells was a single creative vision, something that wouldn't become normalized for another 20 to 30 years in Hollywood. Although we'll never have a true definitive reason as to why people decided to vote against Kane, I think the historical context gives us a pretty good idea. Hearst's smear campaign against Citizen Kane lost Wells his Oscar, but it also set a precedent for how one man could manipulate the Academy Awards. Weinstein did not invent Oscar campaigning. The first modern campaign was spearheaded in the 1970s by Alan Carr, who helped The Deer Hunter win Best Picture. But Weinstein took campaigning to a whole different level. Miramax's Shakespeare in Love tells the fictional story about Will Shakespeare, writing and performing Romeo and Juliet for the first time. So the movie is a crowd-pleasing rom-com that I would say is a Marvel-esque film for people who love Elizabethan literature. It's an okay movie and has some great moments. But a Best Picture winner? Not if you ask the people who saw Saving Private Ryan that year. Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, with its harrowing 20 minutes Omaha Beach opening, was widely considered one of the greatest war films ever made, and certainly one of the best films of that year. It had been in theaters for months, grossing nearly $500 million worldwide. It felt like a given that Spielberg would sweep the Oscars, like he'd done a few years earlier with Schindler's List and Jurassic Park. But there was one problem. Spielberg didn't want a campaign. He felt that the movie was so good that it could speak on its own. Weinstein did not have the same plan. He launched a relentless guerrilla-style campaign, flooding newspapers with ads, whispering that Ryan's only good scene was in its first 15 minutes, and even hand-delivering VHS copies of Shakespeare in Love to every Academy member's home. He even hosted private screenings at retirement homes for the Academy's elderly voters, and also framed the narrative of the campaign around that Shakespeare in Love is a film about Hollywood, knowing that the Academy would eat something like that up. As the Academy Awards creeped closer, it was apparent that the show would be a bloodbath. The two films traded wins.
Shakespeare in Love!
Saving Private Ryan. Dame Judi Dench.
Saving Private Ryan!
Gwyneth Paltrow.
Steven Spielberg.
Then came the final award of the night.
And the Oscar goes to Shakespeare in Love. David Carpet, Donna Gelati, Harvey Weinstein, Edward Zwick.
The win was a complete and total shock to everyone in the audience that night. Spielberg was so devastated about the loss that he skipped out on the press room and fled to the after party. Terry Press, the head of the Ryan campaign after the loss, said, "I will never take the high road with these people again. The next time you'll find me in the mud." Sure enough, DreamWorks would learn the Miramax playbook, and they would win Best Picture next year with their film American Beauty. But ironically, it's another Best Picture winner that hasn't aged super well. Although Weinstein's guerrilla marketing strategy was scrutinized, it has become a fundamental part of award campaigning. However, Shakespeare in Love's victory over Saving Private Ryan stands out amongst the other criticized Best Picture winners. The film itself isn't offensive or egregiously bad. It's simply not a great film and certainly not worthy of a Best Picture Academy Award. Unfortunately, even with historical context, there's no justification for this win beyond its relentless campaign. In the end, Weinstein strong-armed his way to an Oscar, and that's the unfortunate reality. I don't think the same could be said about Crash's win over Brokeback Mountain in 2006. This, I think, was a clear display of homophobia from the elder Academy.
If John Wayne were still alive, he'd roll over in his grave.
Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah. I didn't care to see it because I'm more interested in women than I am in men.
With its high praise from critics and audiences, Brokeback was the clear frontrunner that year. But it turned out that the Academy wasn't ready to award a film depicting homosexuality its top prize yet. For years, Crash was considered the worst Best Picture winner, and it still likely is in the minds of many people, until Green Book won in 2019. That win felt out of touch, but in a different way. While Crash's victory stemmed from ignorance, Green Book's felt self-congratulatory. It's a charming film, sure, but so obvious in its racial relations that it's almost insulting for a movie released in 2018. It's textbook Oscar bait, and honestly, its win just feels like a middle finger to Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, who many thought would take home the award that night. Moonlight, which is a film about a gay man, ended up taking home the top prize in 2017, which is a huge step forward for the Academy. However, this year it didn't seem like the Academy was ready to give out their top prize to an international film, though the following year Parasite would win Best Picture, which was a huge and awesome win. So how does Emilia Perez fit into all of this? Well, when I had started writing this video, it seemed like Emilia Perez was gonna bring home every single award it was nominated for. The energy just felt like it was moving in that direction, and it was very strange. However, a lot has changed since I began writing this video. Just some crazy stuff. This is a pretty unique scenario. The Oscars have kind of returned to form, or at least the Weinstein form. All of the top films of this year seem to be falling under some sort of controversy, and Emilia Perez has without a doubt suffered the worst blow. So it's kind of impossible to say how this will affect Emilia Perez as a whole. But even before this controversy started, there was something really weird about the film's success. Despite being one of the most decorated films of awards season, controversial Best Picture winners usually have their defenders. They always do. I don't know anybody that likes it. Maybe I'm in a bubble, but I don't know a single person that likes this movie. Yes, of course the movie has redeeming qualities, most movies do, but it's been widely criticized by the trans community and people from Mexico. So as we approach the Academy Awards, how does this still have a shot at Best Picture? Well, first we could probably point to an outdated Academy. Shocker, I think we could always do that. As of 2022, despite efforts to diversify, the Academy was still 81% white and 67% male. There's been a push to change that, like in 2021 when the Academy invited 395 new members, 46% of whom were women, and 39% were people of color. But those numbers haven't moved the needle much. The Academy's growing international presence could help explain some of the praise for Emilia Perez, but the core voting body remains largely white and largely male. So, like I said, recent controversies could take this movie out of the race entirely. It seems to be a lock for certain categories like supporting actress and original song. If it is completely knocked out of the race, then it proves that the Academy is paying attention to the zeitgeist in some regard. But again, it's 13 nominations. Don't say that. So the PGA and DGA awards recently awarded Anora with its top prizes. This is historically a strong indicator of where the Oscars are heading, but still this year's slate of films has felt weaker than most, so anything is still possible. One factor that we definitely have to take into account is how Academy Award voting works, because this can certainly help Emilia Perez win Best Picture. The Academy uses a preferential ballot system, meaning voters rank nominees in order of preference. If no film gets a majority of first place votes, the one with the least gets eliminated, and those ballots move to their next choice. This keeps happening until one film has over 50% of the vote. So while Anora may have a passionate fan base, it could also have just as many voters ranking it near the bottom. It's a screwball comedy about a sex worker, something the Academy might instinctively reject. Meanwhile, Emilia Perez, even in the heat of controversy, could hover in the middle of the rankings. If enough people place it second or third, it could survive every elimination round, until it's the last film standing. This system of voting was introduced in 2009, so it doesn't explain the controversial winners before that, like Crash, for example, but it could help us understand why some films have won after that. I wouldn't be surprised if Emilia Perez wins Best Picture. It just feels like the exact kind of misstep that an institution that doesn't really prioritize populist opinion would make. When we look back at controversial or maybe some weaker films in hindsight that have won Best Picture, it helps us contextualize the moment. If we look at the historical context around it, we could help understand that win. This is why I didn't bring up films like Nomadland and Coda, two movies that I particularly like, but they were released and won during a global pandemic, so it kind of gets a pass. By understanding why certain films triumph or don't at the Oscars, we can help make sense of the outrage that follows. And while I don't have the hindsight we do for past winners, this situation makes it clear that the Academy still has major issues to address. You could certainly make the argument that Emilia Perez is a bold choice because of how it bends genre. However, you can make the same argument for films like Anora and The Brutalist, films that may not be bold in its genre bending, but were certainly bold in its production and storytelling techniques. Essentially, they're two films that critique the American dream, but they're also a product of that same dream. Sean Baker has essentially paved his own way in Hollywood, and now he has been rewarded with already the most prestigious prize in the film world and has the potential to win the Academy Award. If Sean Baker walks away with a ton of Oscar wins this year, he's going to be given more money to make bigger projects. That's just what happens. And that's a great thing. I want Sean Baker making more expensive movies. And that's why it matters what wins Best Picture. If a movie like Emilia Perez or Wicked wins Best Picture, then I think that sets a terrible precedent for the future of filmmaking, because it incentivizes producers to put money in the wrong places. We shouldn't be prioritizing sequels or films that quite frankly are just out of touch. Instead, the Academy should reward good art to incentivize money to go in the right places. The Oscars may award a bad movie with a Best Picture win this year, but for the sake of movies, let's hope they don't.